Hello, everyone, and good evening. Thanks for joining us tonight for a monk chat with our resident monastics here at Empty Cloud, at least 3 of them. So we have to my right, Bante Pamuto, maybe, yes, perfect. Bante Sudaso in the middle, and then Ayasoma to my left. So we're glad to see the Venerables back again tonight for some exciting questions and answers. So good evening so far to Muy Bonito, Ricardo, Gita, Ñana, Melinda, Liz, Ned, and all our friends who are watching but not typing questions just yet. So at this time, feel free to type in questions as soon as you have the opportunity. And I'll read them to a monastic and they'll answer as best as they can. All right. So the first question of the night comes from Muy Bonito Ricardo. Bantes, good evening. I'm really excited about tonight's chat, and I have a couple questions. What's the oldest a layperson can be ordained? I believe I read 43. Would anyone like to pick that up?
Would that be?
I'm not sure.
It's question and question. Question and answer.
As far as I know, the Vinaya does not give any. The Vinaya does not give any maximum age for ordination. There is a minimum age. So to receive bhikkhu or bhikkhuni ordination, one must be at least 20 years old. To receive novice ordination, there's actually no minimum age in the Vinaya, but there's a common custom of ordaining at 7 years old. At least in Thailand, I'm not sure about other Buddhist countries. So there's your answer. There's technically no maximum age, but many monasteries will have their own protocols. So many monasteries do have a maximum age limit. It depends on where you go.
All right.
Maybe add in the more established Buddhist countries where it's there's a lot more of a pool of support. It's a bit more open. There's this idea in Thailand of the longta, like an old man who just goes forth in old age because he's kind of done what he's going to do. And it's kind of generally accepted and acknowledged because it's not hard for monks to get alms food in that country. But here in America, there tends to be more regulations because there's also a much higher standard of healthcare. In Thailand, healthcare is provided by the government for monastics, whereas here in America, it's a very expensive thing. So the community has to be prepared to take care of people as their bodies start to fail.
Okay, thank you. And Muy Bonito Ricardo's other question. So they say, Bante Sumino mentioned the other day how the practice didn't really make sense when you don't have a community. This is awful paraphrasing, I apologize. So just to give some context, I believe I remember saying that practicing was difficult if you didn't have the supportive conditions to do so, like the conditions of a community. So then Muy Bonito says, it made me think how Pacheco Buddhas achieve Nibbana through their own effort, then, if they don't have these conditions. Bante Sudaso?
Yeah, it's really hard for them. It takes exceptionally specific and powerful karmic conditions to become a Pacheco Buddha, which one develops over the course of hundreds of lifetimes. It's not easy to be a Pacheco Buddha. In fact, it's quite difficult. It's much more difficult to be a Pacheco Buddha than it is to be an Arhat. And it's already really hard to become an Arhat. Such beings do exist, but they're rare because it's so difficult and requires such specific conditions.
Great, thank you. And welcome to Mark and Robin as well for joining in. There's no more questions at the moment. Very peculiar.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining, and we'll see you next week.
And also for a reminder for our friends on Facebook, feel free to type in your questions and we'll also read them out and the monastics will answer them. as best as they can. Ned just wrote a question. When no Buddha Rupa is available, is it okay to keep the triple gem in mind instead? Perhaps Ayasoma would like to speak on that.
Sure. The question is, if there is no Buddha Rupa available, then it's...
Is it okay to keep the triple gem in mind instead?
Well, I would remove the instead. I would say that whether the Buddha Rupa is present or not, the triple gem should always be present in your mind. So cultivating, that's actually one of the chants that we do every morning here at the monastery, is chanting, is recollecting the great qualities of Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, and getting in tune with that respect, evoking that respect, that admiration towards the triple gem, the preciousness of our human rebirth, with the capability of having the teachings available, and being capable of practicing right here, right now. All of these conditions are extremely rare, extremely valuable. So that is something that we do, whether there is, a sort of tangible physical representation of the Buddha. We should always do it, and we should always cultivate it, nourish it in the mind. That is basically the foundation of faith in Buddhism. Really understanding that the Buddha is an enlightened being, that he has taught the supreme Dhamma that is conducive to liberation, and that there are countless beings who have followed these teachings and have attained liberation as well. What an incredible, wonderful thing. Beautiful. Oh, I'm already like, just by saying this, I'm like, oh, this is so great. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. But yet I'm not seeing any Buddha Rupa in front of me, because the Buddha Rupa is actually on behind, right? So I have to turn my head. Right now, actually, I only see this painting from the beginning of last century, which is a really bizarre depiction of samsara, as I say, where there's lots of different people from the beginning of last century engaging in unwholesome behavior, such as killing animals, torturing them, and so forth. So there's the opposite of actually what is on my back, in my back. Yet, just recollecting Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha brings joy to the mind, uplifts the mind. It's incredible.
Thank you. And the next question is from Robin, and I think each venerable can share a little bit of their own answer. So as a monk, how do you decide specifically what to do to best work toward enlightenment? Perhaps we could start with Ayasoma and work our way down.
Or the other way around. Since I just spoke, just to give more chances.
Wow, that's quite a question. I think the longer that one stays monastic, the more one develops an appreciation for how that'll change, like how we will change through the process of really practicing. Like when you're a monastic, you don't hold anything back. You put everything into the field of practice, including the basic requisites of life. You've put those into the hands of lay donors, of other people to look after you. So you get to see your mind change in really amazing ways. Humility and forgiveness and all sorts of wholesome states start to arise where there weren't any before. So I think our concept of enlightenment matures as we stay with the practice. So I think we start out probably with a very basic idea of what enlightenment is, and we practice meditation very zealously, thinking that that's how we'll get there. But I think over time, it starts to shift to understanding that our entire lifestyle has to change. And so we start to not just be somebody who's deluded and seeking peace, but we become somebody who's actually peaceful and still working at the process, understanding what it is they're moving towards, understanding what they're working with, but really having an idea of the goal. And you really see that as people develop, it really becomes more and more just about having right view in each moment. And when that starts to be the focus, then how you practice day to day was really just about letting go. As you notice you're getting attached to something, you let go. You notice you're getting attached to something, you let go, until you stop getting attached, until that stops coming up for you. So that's
Yeah, so what I would say is, similarly to Bhante Pamuto, I'd say that first off, this is something which will change as time goes by. But what I'd recommend is to look at your own mind and to see where are your defilements strong and work to counteract that. So if you see that you have strong desire for food, well, then do practices which reduce desire for food. If you feel that you have strong aversion, well, then do practices that reduce aversion. If you feel that you have strong delusion, well, realistically, somebody else told you that you have strong delusion. Because if you have strong delusion, you probably didn't figure that out by yourself. And bad news, you've got the hardest job. But work on doing things that reduce your delusion. So that's kind of your basic framework. The other approach is to look to see what wholesome qualities you have and what wholesome qualities you're weak in, and try to build up the ones you're weak in. So for example, if you don't really have much knowledge of the suttas, then study the suttas. If you don't have good samadhi, well, then do a lot of samadhi practice. If you don't have good mindfulness, then practice mindfulness all the time. Well, you should be doing that anyway. So that's another approach, is to look where your weaknesses are and build those up. And really the overarching thing through all of it, by the way, is seeking advice from fellow practitioners, and especially from practitioners who are more advanced than you. And they don't need to be more advanced in every category, but you can consult them about whatever they are better than you at. So when I have questions related to scholarly things, then I talk to people like Bhikkhu Bodhi, because he's much more scholarly than me. When I have questions about meditation, then I contact my preceptor, Ajahn Pasano. So having the humility to ask those who are farther ahead on the path than us in whatever respect we're interested in developing. Those are a few thoughts I have.
Can you repeat the question? I don't remember it anymore.
Sure. As a monk, how do you decide specifically what to do to best work toward enlightenment? Thank
you. Well, everything that the Venerables mentioned, except that I don't call Venerable Padano, because I haven't personally met him and I don't have his direct contact. Hopefully things will change in the future. So I don't do that for my meditation practice questions. But everything else that the Venerables shared, I'm definitely partake in as well, to a certain degree or the other. And what I will add is constantly investigating the Dhamma. So really seeing, questioning where my understanding of the Dhamma, where is it based upon, and where is it coming from, and how also noticing how it's shifting through time, how it has shifted since the beginning of practice. And so from the meaning, from the understanding, perhaps it can be suttas or a Dhamma talk, words of Dhamma spoken by a monastic, words of Dhamma written by a monastic, words of Dhamma spoken by the Buddha in the suttas, and so forth. drawing the parallels, how can these be practical? So not just sort of knowledge that we're accumulating, but how is that relevant to my life, my daily life? How is my mind actually working in the way that it's described in these teachings? And if so, how can it be adjusted so that it's more wholesome rather than unwholesome? So kind of doing this assessment sort of type of work, and then this correction in actions through body, speech, and mind. And always evaluating, saying, okay, so this is what needs to be still worked on, and this is what actually is going pretty well. So maybe I should nourish the wholesome and still work on getting rid of this other unwholesome. And this is done, once again, not only through meditation practice, but also in day-to-day life. So here at the monastery, we interact a lot with one another. So always assessing the quality of those interactions through body, speech, and mind. Watching carefully. Do we have any unwholesome thoughts that are appearing in the mind towards our spiritual companions, whether they're ordained or not ordained? And how is that affecting our practice? And the Buddha says that that is one of the biggest obstacles he names it amongst some of the biggest obstacles for attaining concentration, for example. So we can go, oh, well, maybe that slight irritation. We were just talking right before the live stream how apparently I will, how do you say, shame myself right now on camera. I did a little rant about people reconfiguring the altar. And I actually don't quite remember exactly what I said, but I do remember that is something that will appear in the mind. So it's not even dedicated, like in particular, to one person, but the idea that there was something that was not in accordance to how I thought it should be, which created some distress in the mind. So evaluating and going, oh, well, is that actually necessary? And how is that then affecting the relationships with living with others? So if you live perhaps at home, that's, with your family, thinking how you're relating with your family members, or if you have, just a partner, how you're relating with your partner, or if you're living by yourself, how you're relating to yourself too. That's also part of the equation. So really seeing, always assessing and fixing, assessing and fixing, assessing and fixing, and trying to go closer and closer to Dhamma, but using the Dhamma once again as the right view that points us in the right direction.
Thank you. And we have a question on Facebook from Kevin. How did each of you relinquish your belongings before going forth? If you'd like to start.
I started the last one. It's complicated because I've done that twice.
Oh, well then you can give two answers.
Either the first or the second, or both.
Yeah, both times I had already not accumulated much. So I just constantly like shaving things off. The second time there was a lot more joy in finding people to give it to. The first time I basically tried to get rid of stuff. I remember being in India and having this small pop-up tent that I had taken with me. I'm like, this will protect me from the mosquitoes. And you couldn't lay down in it. It was like a sitting up tent, but it was useless. And so I remember being on the street and seeing a beggar girl. And I'm like, oh, this must be worth a lot of rupees. So I went to offer it to her, and she's like looking at me, and she's like, well, no. And I'm like, yeah, here, it's a tent. And she's like, no, I don't want it. why? And I was like, I can't even, this stuff has no value. I can't even give it away. And so really having to just kind of like leave it in a hotel room and be like, I just want to be free of all this stuff. But the second time around, there was a lot less of a feeling like I needed to just get rid of all of this baggage. And, already I gotten to the point where the things I had were either like, I had them because they were valuable and I knew people I could give them to, or there were a few things I could actually keep. Like the alms bowl I had, I ended up bringing here, and I had kept that through the whole period in between. I hardly had any clothing, so I obviously kept all that. This watch I got from Bhante Atulo many years ago. I still got. You don't need much, so the things I have, were still appropriate from then to now. It's mine not very exciting.
Similarly, mine's not very exciting. So as a layperson, I was not much interested in accumulating things in the first place. So I already had very few things as a layperson. Actually, in retrospect, I was already living a very monk-like life as a layperson. I had very few things, very few sets of clothing. I actually dressed basically the same every day. Oh, hey, how about that? So when I decided to go to the monastery, I didn't actually have that much stuff to deal with. So I gave away what I could give away and threw away what I couldn't give away. It really wasn't difficult at all. Now, once you realize that stuff's just dead weight holding you down, it's no good. It's not really doing you any benefit. Then letting go is easy. It's kind of like when you're drowning and you realize that you're holding on to a giant metal anchor, and you're like, oh, maybe if I let go of this, then I'll stop drowning. Nobody needs to tell you it's time to let go of the anchor. You just let go of the anchor, because why would you hold on to all that dead weight? That's more what the feeling was like for me. There was no disappointment, there was no sadness, there was no grief. It was just like letting go of the dead weight and moving on with my life.
All right. Well, for me, it was slightly different. It happened in, I guess, 3 different stages. The first one was I started a Buddhist organization, Buddhist Insights, together with Bhante Sudato, who didn't own anything, and it was supported mainly by Western non-Buddhist people. I'm talking about Buddhist Insights, and that weren't donating much. So at a certain point, in order to just stay afloat, I was like, well, we need to raise some funds. So I took most of the stuff that was valuable, and I saved just a few things that I was really attached to, and sold them all on the internet, and we stayed afloat. So that was good. So that was first thing that we got rid of. Then what was left over, the few things that I really was attached to, it was just like a little bundle of things that I put in this closet upstairs, because I wanted to make sure that, it was kind of protected and close by, and that I kept an eye on it. This, in hindsight, I'm realizing. And then the rest I put all in the basement. But I didn't realize that if you don't have a dehumidifier in the basement, a lot of creatures like things in the basement. So when I opened all my suitcases or boxes, actually it wasn't even me, it was the retreatants that were coming for the retreats at the retreat center beforehand. They found them, it was all a big pile of mold. So there you go, we all went, bye, see you all in the trash. And then the rest, the last bit that was left, the little pile in the closet of my attachments, material attachments, when I decided to go forth, I actually went through it and selected the people that I thought would appreciate the gifts, and I started giving them. And it was actually such a delightful thing. It was so beautiful. I was really obsessed with this actually 2 Chanel bags that I had. I had Chanel bags. Would never wear them, but they were like there in the closet. I would just look at them. Oh, you're so cute. Very beautiful. And so one of them I gave actually to a friend that we met by running Buddhist Insights, and the other one I gave to one of my friends from my previous life within this life. And they both thought it was fake. They were fake. They were like, "Oh, you're giving me a fake Chanel bag," and I was like, "No, it's real." And they're like, "Are you crazy? Are you gonna wear that?" I was like, "You're gonna wear it with my new robe?" I don't think so. But it made them so happy. And actually, that Chanel bag had never made me happy until that moment when I let it go. It really made me happy. It was so great. It was so lovely. So that was like such a precious teaching. So everything else I was giving away, looking forward to that moment of mudita rather than, uncomfortable craving in the closet, dusting, or in the basement, getting mold and being disappointed of like losing what you thought was valuable. So yeah, now it's great. Also, as a monastic, we have very few things. And when we want to give gifts to others, sometimes it's very challenging because we really don't have much to give. So a lot of times, actually, when instead of being disappointed when you receive something that you don't want or don't need, it's actually such a blessing because you're like, "Oh, this is great. I hate dark chocolate, but all my fellow monastics really love it. That's great. Now I have a stockpile of dark chocolate to give." And it's like a win-win gift. Everybody loves it. Everybody's happy. So you start thinking about material possessions in a different way. And then it doesn't become a burden. It doesn't become like the burden is actually having it. Getting rid of it is joy. Getting rid of it is beautiful. And I'll end with sometimes, though, in the process of letting go of these things, this really interesting thing can happen, that the realization of something that you thought was so valuable, so precious. Like I have all these art books that I was really obsessed with. And I remember picking one of the friends from Buddhist Insights that I thought was really cool, and I liked her a lot. And I was like, "Oh, she's definitely gonna love these books." And I brought them to her, the coffee table books, all like pristine and like kind of expensive. And she looked at them like I had, like given her this thing, with so much excitement, and going like, "I mean, thanks, but not really my thing." And I was shocked because it had so much value, that those objects had so much value in my mind, that it was so difficult for me to see that actually for the majority of people in the world, they were junk. And actually having that exchange was so precious because I saw how attached I was to junk for most of my life, and that I had, I created the glitter, so to speak. So now I see it, and if I see, such books or certain things that I was into the past, including the Chanel bags, they're still like cute and glittery, but it's like junk with glitter. So not something worth holding on to.
Thank you. And the next question comes from Andre. What method of concentration do you use? Breath, Buddha, etc. And how was your experience with getting the mind to settle down? Was it difficult, or is it still difficult? Perhaps Pacheco share.
I use mindfulness of the body, and I start out by moving through points systematically. But it's more like just a mental exercise. It gives my mind something to do that connects it with the present moment experience. And I find pretty quickly through that, like my mind recognizes the pattern. This is a well-worn path. So it starts to collect itself, and it starts to be like, hey, no, this is really relaxing to just do this one thing and kind of move through all the parts. And um, then what was the second part of the question?
Was it difficult getting the mind to settle down, or is it still difficult?
I mean, it still requires effort. Like, it's not simply like I just decide, hey, I'm going to go into samadhi, and it's just samadhi comes about. It's actually, somebody was relating today, a newly ordained anagarika here at the monastery, about how actually pain can be very useful. Like, that sense of a challenge is something that helps bring the mind into the present moment, and it can actually be the precursor to samadhi. Is that moment where we've got a difficult experience, like the mind is restless or the body is in pain, and you're kind of like, okay, I'm not going to run away from this. Let's look at this. Let's be with this. And in being with that, you're being with the whole package of experiences that you're having, and that can actually be the thing that allows the mind to settle. So difficulty in getting the mind to settle isn't necessarily something that needs to go away. It can actually be the first thing you look for. Like, where's the dukkha right now? You're like, yeah. That's what the practice is all about.
Thank you. And the next question from Liz is perfect for Bhante Sadaso. Could this part of dependent co-arising be explained tonight? Based on ignorance, there are conditional phenomena. Based on conditional phenomena, there is consciousness. And based on consciousness, there is mind and body. It's interesting that consciousness is separate and mind and body are grouped together. Can you talk a little bit about this?
I can talk about my perspective on it. But first off, I should preface that by saying that there are a lot of different opinions about Paticca Samuppada. And my opinion is simply one of many. So do some research. You'll find that there's various different scholars who have their own particular expressions of how to understand these things. So my own understanding, avidya, ignorance, is the basic starting condition for all of this. And fundamentally, it's ignorance of the true nature of reality. So ignorance of the truth of anicca, dukkha, anatta. So ignorance of the impermanent, impersonal, and fundamentally empty nature of reality. So based upon that fundamental ignorance, we create a sense of self. And that sense of self then is built upon this fundamental duality of, if there's something that's me, that means there's things which are not me. So already there's a sense of separating things, of discriminating between things. So this is sankhara. So sankhara has many different meanings, but one meaning that it has is separate object. So sankharas then are separate objects. So one translation then for sankhara here in Paticca Samuppada is discrimination, and that we're separating, in a discrimination in its meaning of separating objects from each other, discriminating between separate objects. So projecting the appearance of separate objects. Fundamentally, there are no separate objects, but we project the appearance of separate objects because of our delusion, because of our ignorance. And then that becomes the basis of consciousness. I am conscious of those separate objects over there. And then from that, it's like, well, what is it that is conscious of those separate objects over there? It is this mind and body, which is me, which is conscious of those not me objects over there, those things which are separate from me, separate from my mind and body. So I see mind and body being stuck together because mind and body is, it's the specific components of being. So consciousness here is that general awareness. I exist and I am aware of things. But then the next question is, well, what am I? What is this me that is conscious of other things? So then we start pointing out specific things. specific components of mind and body. So that's my understanding of why mind body is linked together in that case. Okay.
All right. Thank you. And Sierra has a question. So hello, Venerables. Can you give guidance on repressing thoughts and emotions versus redirecting thoughts and emotions? When an unwholesome thought comes up that I haven't been able to identify, am I redirecting it or just avoiding and repressing it?
They're all staring at me.
And I was going to direct the question at you as well.
But I didn't quite understand the last bit.
So I'll just read it as it is. And maybe Sierra, if you could elaborate. So Sierra writes, can you give guidance on repressing thoughts and emotions versus redirecting thoughts and emotions? When an unwholesome thought comes up, I haven't been able to identify if I'm redirecting or just avoiding and repressing the thoughts and emotions.
Okay. Well, if you're not sure, then you're probably repressing, or what was the other option?
Avoiding.
Avoiding, yes. So you're skipping the most important thing before redirecting anything. So before training the mind, you need to understand the mind. You need to understand what you're dealing with. So, for example, if you're dealing with anxiety, or if you're dealing with anything, if you're dealing with anger, if you're dealing with any type of emotion, first you need to understand the emotion. And then based on understanding that emotion, you can train yourself, because you can apply the teachings based on what you see. And this actually applies for anything in Buddhist practice. A lot of times, we will actually start taking on certain practices, for example, the Thanga practices, that are not exactly what we really need to work on, but something perhaps that we have already, if not mastered, we're quite already okay with. Actually, Bhante Sudasa, I think, was the one who was sharing a while back how, as a junior monk, he was taking the practice of eating only once a day, or not eating at all. And I mean, by his size, you can judge how doesn't seem exactly his problem, overeating or indulging in food, or definitely it wasn't back then. So we have to, first of all, understand what we're dealing with. What are the inclinations of the mind? If our mind is tending towards greed, towards hatred, towards delusion, we're going to have experience always a mix of all of these elements, but there will always be one that is predominant. So if we have an aversive mind, then perhaps taking the practices of Subha meditation, not very useful, is it? But if we have a mind that veers towards greed, then actually a Subha meditation could be something extremely useful and beneficial. And things will change and shift as our practice moves forward. But getting back to the basics, one of my the first ways through which actually I got into meditation practice, I remember I was taught to look at the breath, but it was very difficult for me to generate any type of interest in the breath because it was too subtle at the very beginning. But what I couldn't overlook were my emotions, my strong emotions. I still have strong emotions, but nothing compared to 5 years ago, however long it was. And so I just started noticing, like, instead of overlooking, instead of repressing them, instead of like making a problem out of them in meditation practice, I started learning, what is this? Let me look at it. Instead of it being the breath, how about I pick this agitation or this anger or this craving, incredible strong craving for sensual pleasure. The boredom sometimes in meditation practice can generate an incredible, like, physical bodily feeling. So watching it, learning from it, looking at it, what is this? Oh, this feels this way. Right now, there's like agitation in the body. Right now, there is a heartbeat that is accelerated. Right now, there is tension in the stomach. What does it feel like? And keeping the attention there without any sort of story, without thinking, oh, it comes from this, from when I was a child, or it comes from like I had this exchange with Bante Sumano before, la la la, and I'm still thinking about it, or perhaps it's that I heard that people are offering food tomorrow of this type, blah, blah, blah. But rather just learning the emotion, seeing it, and seeing how it constantly changes. That we think that we are perhaps, if we're aversive types, we think that we're aversive 24/7, but in reality, we're not. We're actually maybe aversive 5 minutes during a day, like in total. But it's such a strong thing that we're either avoiding it or not paying attention to it, that then we think it's the whole day, and then it becomes the whole day. Because we don't know where it starts, we don't know where it's happening, we don't know where it ceases. So how can you change something if you don't know when it's happening? So our first job is to learn, to look, become acquainted, become familiar with the mind. And then once you understand the quality of the mind, then you practice in accordance to Dhamma. Then you do certain meditation practices, you cultivate sila. Oh, actually, you should do it before. Meditation practice, but actually before, during, and after. So doing certain actions, working, how can I be more generous? Where should I let go? If you're very generous with money, then perhaps look at how to be more generous with time, or with looking at particular objects that will make the person happy, or vice versa. If you're really generous with giving food or giving requisites, then maybe, and a little bit stingy with money, work on that. And all of these things together create the conditions for altering the mind, shifting the mind, because you're going to see, oh, now by putting these conditions in place, this result happens. This shift in the mind happens. And so you're starting to redirect the mind towards the wholesome. But there has to be, once again, I reiterate this, learning, acknowledgement, understanding of what you're dealing with to begin with. You can't skip that part. You need to look at the dust in the room before sweeping. Otherwise, you're going to sweep what is already being swept. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. And Andre says, famous quote by Ajahn Chah, anything which is troubling you, anything which is irritating you, that is your teacher. Could you elaborate on this quote? Oh,
like, yes, that's true. That's true.
Everyone has a response, but perhaps Bhante Sadasa would like to share.
Well, I'm never irritated, so I'm not.
Everyone laughs before the sentence is even complete.
So once in a rare while, I get a little bit annoyed. Anyway, so I'm an inveterate hate type. So I'm quite familiar with hating things and being annoyed by things. What was the question again?
Anything which is troubling you, anything which is irritating you, that is your teacher. This is a famous quote by Ajahn Chah. Could you please elaborate on it?
Yeah, because it's pointing out where your aversion, defilement is strong. So it's pointing out where your equanimity is still weak, and you still have work to do in training your own mind. So that's why these things are our teachers. The difficult thing is that sometimes, so for example, if somebody's saying something that's really pissing you off and you start getting irritated, and then the person says like, oh, your defilements are coming out, you need to work on that. Well, that will tend to just annoy you even more, which is pointing out once again your defilements. So And at some point, we need to break that habit of just constantly getting annoyed, and then getting annoyed when people point out that we're getting annoyed, and then getting annoyed that they point out that we're annoyed, that we got annoyed, and so on. At some point, we just have to stop and look at our defilements, realize that they're unwholesome, they're contrary to the Buddha's teachings, they're uncomfortable, they weaken samadhi, they prevent wisdom, and it's time to let go of it. So that's my interpretation of what he meant by that quote. Ayasoma could also give a great answer about this. Similarly, lots of experience on the subject matter.
But I overcame it because I'm not irritated at all with you pointing it out. So there you go. See, it's a teacher.
Yeah.
I had a fun experience of this with Drew today. So we were tasked with sweeping a parking lot because we did an asphalt repair, and there's these sticky little pebbles that are meant to wedge into the crack and form this perfect kind of like seal for the crack. Well, no, it didn't happen that way. It was too cold, and we didn't have a tamper. We couldn't get them in, so they just kind of like flaked off, and they've been tracked all over the parking lot. So we're out there sweeping, and Drew is like, I don't know what we're doing. We're gonna be out here again tomorrow if we don't do this right, but I don't know what right is. And I'm just sort of like, it's not that complicated, man. You just gotta sweep. Just do what they told you. Just sweep it into piles and get it out of the way. And she's like, okay, yeah. And then related a story of Lumpur Sumedho, who was the first Western disciple of Ajahn Chah. We heard this story dozens of times as we were growing up in the robes at Abhayagiri. Lumpur Sumedho was tasked every single day, the whole community of Wapapong, they would go out and sweep a dirt path. Like the path is already dirt, and they would sweep it off. And Ajahn Chah would just have them out there in the like 2 p.m. sun and heat, just sweeping this path, getting it all nice and even more dirt. I don't know, but Sumedho was there. He would be sweeping. He'd be like, "This is stupid. We could all be in our cabins meditating, but instead we're here sweeping this dirt path. And why are we sweeping it? We're actually like creating this trough where water will gather. This doesn't make any sense at all." And Ajahn Chah picks up on it and like comes over to him at one point, and he's like, "Oh, poor Sumedho. Wapapong is suffering, yeah." And Lumpur Sumedho got it. It was like he was causing himself all of this trouble, and Lumpur Cha just wasn't making a big deal out of it. It's like, you take care of the monastery, you sweep. It doesn't matter if it's dirty or not. You just go out there every day and you sweep, and that's what makes a clean monastery. So a little while later, I was like looking at the patches, and I was starting to spin out. I'm like, we've broken off even more. Like every time we sweep, there's just more, and we're tracking it everywhere we go. And Drew's just looking at me, and he's like, "Oh, Drew, just let go. There's no problem here. Just sweep. It'll all be good." And I just looked at him, and I'm like, "Oh yeah." It was the perfect teaching for that moment. I had no good excuse or Dhamma teaching in that moment. It had just come full circle, and I had to just laugh and just shake my head. Yeah, it'll always be like that.
So you're saying the job's not done?
Irritation rises in the mind.
Great. That's fine. There's always tomorrow.
And the day after tomorrow.
And the day after that.
And Mark has a question. Mark says, "So when I meditate, especially lately, I hear a brief, loud sound that always goes from left to right and is never the same. A Google on this says many, many others have this experience. Any thoughts?"
Pay it no mind. Be aware of it, but don't make a big deal out of it.
You wanted to take it?
No, I'm trying to figure out what that might be like.
I thought you wanted to take it. Okay.
I'm hearing on one side, and then it goes to the other side.
Don't worry.
All right. And then Danilo says, my meditations lately have been seeming out of focus, often with periods of blanking out. Have you experienced this? How to fix it? And how should one work with tightness of the body during meditation?
Those are two different questions. The first one, if you're sitting with your eyes closed, then open your eyes. Another thing is you might change your meditation object. Sounds to me like you're not really interested in the meditation. Another possibility is that you're just really tired. So ask yourself that question. Are you getting enough sleep? Are you drinking enough tea? So if that's not the problem, then the problem is probably that you're just not really interested in the meditation method that you're using. So if getting more sleep and drinking more tea and meditating with your open eyes, if none of that works, then change your meditation method. Do something else. Use a different method and see if that perks up your interest again so that you're more inclined to pay attention.
And how should one work with tightness of the body?
Oh, just relax. What's the big deal? Actually, one thing which helps tremendously is to bring your awareness to the feeling of tightness and decide that it's okay. Like, oh, this is what a tight body feels like. Okay. Yep, tension in the body. This is what it feels like. No problem. Nothing wrong here. And the interesting thing which happens paradoxically is that once you decide that the tension is okay, then it will start to release. Or maybe it won't, but either way, who cares? Because you've already decided it doesn't matter. But it does actually usually tend to soften. The body tends to soften up. But whether it softens up or not is totally beside the point. Buddhism is not the path of loose bodies. Buddhism is not the path of low tension. Buddhism is the path of samadhi and wisdom that leads to liberation. It has nothing to do with tension in the body at all. But as you cultivate samadhi and wisdom, then the tension will tend to reduce on its own. But that's a side effect. It's not a goal. It's totally beside the point. That said, there are some meditation teachers who emphasize relaxing tightness in the body. And that's also perfectly fine. Some people find those instructions helpful. Another technique, by the way, that you can use if you're really obsessed with this whole tightness thing, which once again, don't be because it's meaningless. But if you're really obsessed with it, one thing that can help is to intentionally tighten up all the muscles in your body, like really squeeze all those muscles and then release. And sometimes what you'll find is that that release leaves you a little bit more relaxed than before you started. And it's also teaching you what it feels like to let go of tension so that you can do it more easily. These are a couple things you can do.
Great, thank you, Bhante. And the next question, perhaps Ayasoma can share a bit about. There's a saying I often hear that goes, even if you were to carry your parents on your shoulders for the rest of your life, then you wouldn't be able to repay your debt to them. The only way to repay them is to give them Dhamma. Do the Venerables also try to give your parents Dhamma?
Yeah, and it's hard. If you have an Italian mother and father, actually, both, like from Italy, very difficult to repay your parents according to those instructions, and just because they're very street smart, so they're like, as soon as I'm getting too Buddhist, they're like, without even using the words Buddha or Dhamma or Sangha, which, by the way, aside from the first one, I don't think they even understand. They don't know. But they're already like, what are you trying to do? You're trying to brainwash me with all that stuff, that gibberish, through which they brainwashed you. Just one in the family is enough. So then what I've tried to do instead is, instead of like getting into the conversations with a sort of plan in mind, is to just be there present for my parents with whatever sort of mind state they're going through, whatever trouble they're going through. And a lot of the times actually just listen. And that is actually practicing Dhamma. So we think that Dhamma needs to be necessarily, like teaching the Dhamma needs to necessarily be, giving a Dhamma talk, sitting down and lecturing. But actually, when you think about it, like someone like Ajahn Chah, who has had such an influence here in the West, didn't speak a word of English. Master Sheng Yen, who is the founder of the Dharma drum tradition, actually is reputed to say something. I think it was actually an inner dialogue where he was, when they were about to start their center in New York City, the Chan Center in New York City, their first center in the West. It was like, oh, but I don't speak a word of English. How am I going to share the Dhamma with people? And then he reminded himself, well, the Dharma has no language. So this is very true. Sometimes it can sound like a little bit cliche, like an Instagrammable caption. Dharma has no language, no words, something like that. But actually, what does it really mean? And for someone like me, for example, going to Taiwan or Thailand and meeting so many very well-developed practitioners there, but with whom I couldn't have a sit-down conversation, like a dialogue, because they didn't speak English nor Italian, and I didn't speak a word of Chinese. And Google Translate with Chinese is awful. You will be saying, trying to put, I would like ice cream, and it will translate, I want to kill your children. Literally, it will be completely, you don't want to use that app. We tried, very, very dubious. So they're great with Italian, though. I noticed the translation is pretty accurate with Italian and English, for example, but not English or Italian with Chinese. Anyway, besides the point, when I went there was this nonverbal communication with a lot of the practitioners. And there were so many incredible teachings because they were embodying the Dhamma. The Dhamma was their life. They were just everything. Was something that you breathe. Sometimes it's not even practitioners. Sometimes it's the culture. Just going around in Thailand, seeing the generosity, the incredible generosity that is embedded in the culture. How beautiful. That's such an incredible Dhamma teaching. Meeting here in the West, so many people born Buddhist. Some of them who don't speak English, but they somewhat interact with me. It's incredible. The qualities of Dhamma they have developed since little kids. So in the same way, that's what I try to do a lot of times is remind myself that I don't need to give my parents a Dhamma talk. That's counterproductive. But rather, that's the time to actually practice these teachings. That's the time to practice right speech. That's the time to practice right action. Really be there and practice compassion. So I guess I am trying. I have the aspiration to repay them.
Great, thank you. And we have a couple questions on YouTube still, but just a reminder for the Facebook audience to feel free to type in questions at any time if you have them. So the next question comes from Brian. And Brian says, what are the clear signs that one has made good progress on the path? Is it by the type of defilement that arises or doesn't arise in the mind, like more subtle forms of defilement? How do we know that we have reached safety if one isn't enlightened yet?
Well, that's the thing. It's not like you reach some sort of plateau where there's nothing left to do, but you just feel it inside yourself. And if you've been doing this for a year, then you look back 1 year and you say, wow, I was so messed up then. And I'm pretty messed up now, but not as bad. And if you've been in 10 years, you do the exact same process. You don't even remember what you were like 10 years ago, but you know you were suffering seriously. and you look around, it's like, wow, things are a lot more settled. Like stuff comes up every day, but I actually have some tools to handle it now. Because can you even remember a time before you had heard of the Dhamma? Just aimlessly meandering, trying to figure out how to be happy and following every instruction that you had gotten growing up, and they're not working. And then you hear the Dhamma, and you're just so happy because at least you have a direction. It's telling you there's a lot of work to be done, but you actually, for the first time in your life, you're happy to hear that there's something that can be done. It's like feeling sick and knowing that something's wrong, not really knowing exactly what. And then the doctor finally says, "Oh, I'm sorry, you got cancer." And you'd be like, "Oh, thank God." Because now you know there's this disease. It can be treated in this way. It's going to have this end result depending on different factors. It's like, at least you know what you're working with. And so even from the get-go, that amount of suffering has been alleviated. The Venables might be able to.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, great.
Great, thank you. And Mark says, over the last year, I had to clear out 2 neighbors' apartments who had died. And while at first it was terribly grim, in the end, I looked at all my stuff and realized that nobody would want most of it. So I let go of most of my things, and now I only try to have things that will have value to others when I go. Is this still delusional, or is this for the benefit of others, like my nice house?
Sounds great. Yeah, keep it up.
Yeah. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. It's very wholesome.
Yeah, if you ever get to go inside the cabin or the dwelling space of a longtime practitioner, I think of Lumpur Pasano or Lumpur Viradamo, who I attended on both of them at different times. Like, you get to look around their cabin and realize that they only have things with significance. They don't have anything that has no meaning. Everything they have was given to them, and they know who gave it, under what conditions, and it has like a function in their lifestyle. It's really remarkable to see a cabin that's just full of stuff, and you could point to any one thing, and the VA say, "Oh, so-and-so gave that to me when I was looking after the New Zealand monastery." And I'm like, wow. They get to look around their space, and every single thing that their eye lands on brings up a wholesome mind state. And that's something to shoot for. Not necessarily having no stuff, but actually the stuff improves your life in that way.
It's also good to have no stuff.
Great. Thank you, everyone. And Liz also says, thank you for your thoughtful and informative answers, as always. Michael says, is it commonplace for dogs to live in monasteries? I'm asking because reprimanding an unruly dog doesn't feel very Buddhist. We do have a monastery cat, though, and so maybe Ayasoma can share a little bit about what that experience is like.
Actually, what comes to mind, are a few things. One, that sometimes whenever we take care of beings, we can get a little bit delusional about it, whether we are practitioners or not, really. And thinking that the way to be compassionate, or the way to actually taking care of someone, the best ways to do it is to either always say yes, or please them in one shape or form, or not always say things very gently with like voice like this, and be very sweet. But actually, most often than not, that sort of attitude ends up with really unruly children, really unruly animals. A lot of the animals actually that are given to animal shelters by their owners, it's because they attack other people. In the case of dogs, and in the case of cats, they bite and scratch, or they don't use whatever. They have all sort of behavioral issues. And, with children, most parents luckily kind of deal with those issues. And force others in restaurants or in society to deal with those issues as well. And unfortunately, with animals, they just dump them most of the time because the animal is quite intolerable. So actually, the monastery cat that I've been taking care of personally before Buddhist Insights and for quite some time, and now everybody's taking care of him. At the very beginning, he was a full-grown cat, and he was quite unruly, quite obnoxious, actually, to the point that the people that I was living with were begging me to bring him back to the shelter because he was just not. He was biting people. He was doing all sorts of naughty things. So what I learned was actually their behavior and the behavior of felines, and started instructing him. This is appropriate. This is not appropriate. Learning how cats actually, I did lots of weird things, but without getting into the details, lots of times it's not terribly pleasant. And when I've seen actually dogs that were really well taken care of in particular and loved, there was no abuse whatsoever, the caretakers were actually pretty strict when they needed to be strict, and they were cuddly when they needed to be cuddly. And that was actually for the benefit of the dog. So the dog was actually, that's what he was looking for. That's their pack, the way that they are formed. They need to have a pack leader. If they don't have a pack leader, they will go deranged because they will be unhappy. They will suffer. So if you actually put yourself as a pack leader, you are giving certain discipline to the dog, who will then be happier. So in the same way, we see that the Buddha actually in the suttas, he's not like molasses and just telling everyone, oh yeah, hello. Oh, what a silly view you have. Oh, come on, let's sit down. Let's have some tea and cookies. Are you sure that you can take this message? Are you ready? No. Sometimes he uses that. Well, not exactly how I described it, perhaps, but sometimes he's very kind and generous, accommodating, especially with people who are experiencing, for example, grief, distress. Someone who just had their children die, like in the case of Patachara and Kisagotami before they attain awakening. But other times he's very actually to the point and forceful. Sometimes he actually has no problem saying you fools, you stupid fools, or something like that. Like the language can be quite strong in the suttas. And we can react to it like, oh, how can an enlightened being say such a thing? But actually the problem is not with the enlightened being using that forceful language, but it's with us, within ourselves. It's the work that we need to do. And the Buddha uses that simile of when, I'm probably going to butcher it, so please correct me, Bhante, if you remember otherwise, but if a little child swallows a pebble and it gets stuck in the throat, and then a nurse, a caretaker, to save the child who can lose his life, what would she do? She would stick the fingers into the throat and grab the pebble as hard as she can to remove it. And perhaps that will draw blood. And will the child be happy or not about will he cry? Will he be in distress? Most certainly he will be in distress. But doing that forceful action is for the benefit of the child, for his long-lasting welfare. So it's the appropriate response given those circumstances. So that's what we have to generate. This is my understanding within Buddhist practice. It's not to have one size fits all kind of approach. That's when we become a doormat. Lots of times we're like, okay, may everybody just walk on me, and or let's just raise entitled animals or entitled kids, obnoxious children, but rather it's understanding right now with this child, with this dog, with this cat with whoever it is, right now, the right time is to hug them. Right now is to like say sweet words. And perhaps at other times it's good to be, forceful, direct, strict. So in other words, there's no problem being a monastic and taking care of. Actually, it's great practice.
Thank you. Muy Bonito Ricardo asks, have you venerables gone out for alms? Does that make sense in the infrastructure your monastery has? Very relevant question.
Yeah, actually we go once a week. During the warmer months, we were going to the farmer's market, which is about a 45-minute walk from here. So we would walk there and go for alms there. And we were always very well received and well supported. The local farmers market doesn't run during the winter, so we've had to go to the next town over to go alms around there instead. And in fact, we're going tomorrow, so we go every Saturday. Yeah, it's a lovely practice. I've always appreciated alms round. So for as long as I've been a monk, I go almost every opportunity I get. Not quite every opportunity, but most of the time I'll go. Because it's really beautiful how even people who don't know anything about Buddhism or anything about monks or anything about alms round, they understand and they come and give. And it's just amazing. So there's something about alms round which cuts through all differences of culture and religion and touches something very deep in the human heart, which can help, again, people from all backgrounds to awaken the seeds of enlightenment within themselves.
Mm-hmm. And the next question is from Art, who asks, on average, how do you meditate in a day? How often? How long?
All day.
Great.
All day, every day.
I mean, really, if you really like, meditation is essential to like the practice in a way, but not like the formal, like I got to sit down and stop everything, but like the mindfulness and the samadhi, the composure of mind. So if you really value that, you're going to make it a part of your day, no matter what's going on. And I mean, most of my adult life, yeah, I've made an effort to get up before things get started and to sit in the morning. And I end up waking at 3:30, 4 a.m., even on days when I'm allowed to rest, because it's just so ingrained. It's like, that's the time when you can sit. That's the time when you can get ready for the day. It's the time when nothing else is going on. It's harder in the evening. I tend to just kind of go fuzzy. But yeah, all day, every day, just find opportunities. You're waiting in a line, follow the breath. You're sitting on a subway car, or subway station. Yeah, take advantage of it.
Thank you. And the next question comes from Brian. Does Buddhist insights allow for temporary ordination in the future, like a month or 3 months or so, just to see if monastic life is something one can do? I've heard of monasteries that do this.
Well, we had a slot for a male monk and a slot for a female monk. The slot for the male monk has been occupied, has been taken. The slot for the female monk might be taken soon. So we're done for 2020, but being back in 2021, we'll see. Everything is impermanent. So especially here, we follow the ancient tradition of the disorganized religion. So we make certain rules and then we change them. And then we bring them back into course again. Then we change them again. And then we add a few more. So it's all ever changing.
One thing I would add to that is if you want to get a taste of monastic life, just go and live in a monastery for a little while. Most Buddhist monasteries, not all, but many or most of them allow non-monastics, allow lay people to stay for extended periods of time. In fact, they're often very happy when lay people want to come and stay for long periods of time. It's really helpful for monasteries to have a few good, solid, reliable, long-term lay residents. We have one here. She's great. We love her very much.
Mm-hmm.
She smiles because she knows we love her.
There's just another one.
Yeah, but she's becoming a monastic soon. If you're interested in monastery life, then just go stay at a monastery for a month or 2 or 3. You don't necessarily need to get temporary ordination. Of course, if you can, it's a nice thing to do, but just live in a monastery for a few weeks and see what it feels like. Yeah.
You might stay.
You might stay, or you might go somewhere else.
Okay, thank you. And that was the last question. Oh, spoke too soon. Well, it was the last question, but a comment just appeared that said, I've always seen going for alms as a beautiful act of communion between lay people and monastics. Great merit for both parts.
Yeah, true. Yep.
Yeah, no, the Buddha was very smart when he put together this very simple system, but such a profound teaching, because you're both practicing giving and receiving at the same time, which are two central components of Buddhist practice. They're both actually the same mirror of letting go. You're letting go, perhaps if you're a lay person, of actual material goods. And if you're a monastic, you're letting go of your independence, or whatever you think of your delusion of independence. You're letting go of your arrogance. You're letting go of your preferences. And you're practicing receiving, but you're also giving the opportunity for people to practice generosity. That's why, going on alms rounds, lots of people that are not familiar at all with Buddhism, as Bhante was mentioning, love to come in and offer food, because it's a great opportunity to give. And giving delights the mind. It's incredible how simple such a thing is, and yet how counterintuitive it is for us. We keep on thinking that we need to accumulate stuff, hoard stuff, and we're like more and more unhappy. But then the more we give, so great. Oh, so lovely. So yeah, so it's beautiful. It's such a precious, incredible teaching, that's like there is not like a sutta that explains step by step, like all of these things, at least that I'm aware of. But it's through just this practice, I was like, wow, this is just so delightful. And just by, adding a precept in the Vinaya, like in the code, you create this such a beautiful system. Yeah.
And I will offer a chance for members from the live audience to ask a question. The non-monastics, monastics to be, and the monastics who are watching. All right.
Oh, they talk to us all the time.
It's Antoinette without a question. That just doesn't compute.
There is one question that popped up from Danilo, who says, I wonder if I can volunteer at the monastery for a month in the summer, but my family will most likely need most of my help during that time and after I start college. I wonder when it would be possible for me to go to a retreat or do some monastery work volunteer work at a monastery.
It's possible when you decide to do it. So all those excuses that you just said, those are just stories. Throw them out. They're meaningless. They're just excuses. If you want to spend some time in a monastery, just go spend some time in a monastery. If you want to do it next summer, then do it next summer. Your family will deal with it. Just make it your priority and it will happen. Okay?
You can also go for a shorter time. Like, it doesn't have to be an entire month, unless, of course, there's a pandemic. Then there's like different conditions. But normally, actually, I think if you go for the first time to a monastery, I think there's regularly a two-week maximum. So there you go. That problem is solved for you.
Danilo says, well then, I will call my local monastery.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
Binaural Dean asks, hi, can there be devas who are here on Earth? Do they reside in any non-physical form, or can they have a physical body or form? Thank you.
Yes, yes, and yes to all your questions. They're called Bhuma Deva, which literally mean earth devas, so devas who live on the earth. And pretty much every human culture throughout the beginning of humanity has spoken about them in one form or another. So every single human culture has spoken about the presence of spirits and celestial beings that share the earth with us and sometimes interact with humans. Yeah, they're here. The kind that we have around here are the kind that do have bodies, but some of them have visible bodies and some of them have invisible bodies. But that's another subject of discussion. Yeah, most people can't see them unless they really want to be seen. So most humans don't have much interaction with them.
Danilo asks then, in that case, would a forest spirit be considered a deva?
Yeah. Yeah, that'd be a Bhuma Deva. Leprechauns, pixies, these are all Bhuma Devas.
All right. And that seems to be the last question of the night, unless another pops up while I'm giving the closing announcements, so to speak. So tomorrow morning, like was mentioned, we'll be at Montclair Farmers Market here in New Jersey between 9:30 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. So if you can, definitely stop by. Next week, the residents here at the monastery will be doing another mini silent retreat. So we'll have Bhante Santi, who will be sharing some words of Dhamma as well as sutta studies and hosting monk chat all by himself. So definitely bring your questions and your love for the Dhamma next week for the live streams, which will continue. But as usual, good to see everyone. Thanks for your questions and for your attention and constant diligence. We see a lot of familiar faces every day, and it's really great to cultivate that sense of community online. So good to see everyone. We can end with 3 sadhus.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
And enjoy your weekend.